On June 14th, the population of Paris endured the sight of the Wehrmacht marching in triumph down the Champs-Élysées. The surrender terms that Hitler imposed on the French were revenge and retribution for the humiliation of the Treaty of Versailles, a humiliation that the corporal decorated for bravery on the Western Front had felt so keenly. The French army was reduced to 100,000. The cost of the German occupation was to be borne by the French. Hitler famously went sightseeing in the French capital. On the other side of the continent of Europe, yet another opportunist state took its chance. The Soviet Union invaded and extinguished the independence of the tiny Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, annexing them into the USSR. On June 17th, Pétain was made premier of a new French government which had made peace with Hitler, with a base in the southern French town of Vichy. The Vichy regime was to become a byword for collaboration and betrayal. On June 18th, another Frenchman, Charles de Gaulle, made a broadcast from London to the French people. He boldly declared that the war was not over and the French must resist. He denied that the Vichy regime had any legitimacy. De Gaulle's story truly proves that there is such a thing as destiny. De Gaulle was a devout Catholic and fierce patriot. 3 times wounded in the First World War, he spent much of that conflict as a prisoner of the Germans. His life, until World War II, was spent as an unspectacular career soldier. He wrote books about armored, mechanized war, but his ideas found no acceptance in the French military. In 1940, he was made the commander of a division that was forming, which had some minor successes as the French army crumbled. On June 6th, he was appointed a junior defense minister in the hastily reorganized government. He was a minister for just 10 days, but during that short period, he met and impressed Winston Churchill. When the French government resigned on June 16th, de Gaulle was smuggled into the UK. At Churchill's personal insistence, his famous broadcast was made. De Gaulle became recognized as the head of the Free French and began to mastermind a strategy of striking back at the Axis from wherever possible, most notably the far-flung corners of the French colonial empire. Remote corners of the world declared war against Vichy and the Axis. De Gaulle saw his duty as a religious calling. "Events impose this sacred duty on me. I shall not fail to carry it out," he said. De Gaulle would, in the coming years, boldly fight as the leader of a free people, mounting actions independent of his allies. Through strong self-belief, he refused to become subject to Britain and acted as an independent leader. Pétain's government tried de Gaulle for desertion and, in his absence, condemned him to death. The 100,000 Free French were just the largest group of defiant exiles that had refused to surrender to the Germans and by roundabout routes had escaped from occupied Europe and found their way to Britain to carry on the war. A Czechoslovak brigade, 5,000 strong, existed as part of the British Army. 4 squadrons of the RAF flew with Czech markings. The Polish armed forces made up an even more sizable number of anti-Nazi forces. In 1940, there were 14,000 soldiers, numerous naval and merchant ships, and 5 squadrons in the Polish Air Force. In the coming Battle of Britain, Polish pilots were to be among the most resolute, courageous, and successful destroyers of German attackers. In early July, an engagement was fought which demonstrated to the world that Churchill's defiance was not just words. The French fleet, the fourth largest in the world, lay at anchor, having hardly seen action. The British feared the Vichy government would surrender these ships and place them at the disposal of the Germans. The Royal Navy sent a powerful fleet to lie off the ports in which the French fleet lay, and the French admirals were given hard choices: put to sea and join the British in a combined fleet, scuttle their ships, or be destroyed. The French Admiralty refused to comply and ordered all ships at sea to move to the ports where the main fleet lay to confront with the British. The Royal Navy intercepted the message, and the British ships opened fire. The French ships at anchor were easy targets, and the bulk of the Vichy Navy was destroyed. Nearly 1,300 French sailors died, creating a legacy of bitterness. Churchill's words were turned into action. Britain really would pay any price to survive. On August 5th, Italian troops invaded British Somalia from their neighboring East African colony. The motivation for war was once more Mussolini's ego and passionate, ravenous hunger for conquest to add to his new Roman Empire. The fighting between European powers and European ideologies was spreading over the surface of the planet to embroil all peoples. Men were to fight and die in all corners of the earth. The fall of France had a wide effect on the conduct of the war, affecting the war of resources, the war of economic and industrial strength. It has been said that all wars have at their root the control of resources, of food, of raw materials, of manufactured products, including weapons themselves. The possession of these resources is as important in bringing victory as much as number and quality of armies, navies, and air forces. The preconditions of the war of resources was not in Britain's favor. In 1939, Germany was self-sufficient in food and most raw materials. Her supplies of energy were based on coal. Oils she had to import, but advanced science and technology meant that coal-based substitutes for oil could be found. In Britain, the position was far different. Britain was a trading nation which looked out to the rest of the world, its merchant fleet the largest. Britain needed to import no less than 55 million tons of goods of all kinds each year to survive. Compared to Germany's self-sufficiency, that merchant fleet had to bring wheat from North America, meat from South America and Australia. If all shipping imports to England were halted, it would take a mere few months to completely starve Britain to death. At the outbreak of war, the huge British Royal Navy had thrown a tight blockade around Germany, closing the narrow gaps of the Channel and the North Sea. German naval strength was trapped, their warships facing a long, tortuous journey before being able to attack British trade. As France fell, this ground, which determined naval strategy, shifted. With the occupation of France, the Germans could use the French Atlantic ports